We are welcoming back Ed after a little break to give us this new lecture series that he usually does every year to update us on what's been going on in our economy and society. So for this year, we're going to have two sessions. I guess there is so much going on. That's why we're going to meet not only today, but session number two is due a week from now, May 22nd, same time. And Ed is someone that you all know. He's been a great instructor for the school. He's been a George almost all his life, at least the part that I know. And he's also, uh, he writes a lot. He is also running the School of Cooperative Individualism. Many of you are already familiar with the great set of materials that he have there. So without taking too much of the time, I'm gonna let Ed step in and begin the lecture. Thank you, Ed.
All right, thank you, Ibrahima. Let me first say this is I think we'll get through this material in two sessions, but this is a truncated presentation of a much larger work that is still underway. It consists of 18 different modules on the state of the U.S. economy and our society here. And I have recorded now 12 of them. I've been trying to upload them to my YouTube channel every so often to give people time enough to take in the most recent one without putting the next one up. But but I'm probably going to accelerate the rest of the group and get them done in the next couple of weeks, just to get them up and running. Now, here's what the challenge is for me. As I go through them before I record them, I'm trying to update the data if I can get the data. For those of you who have done research on economic statistics, the data that's publicly available lags behind reality, often by more than a quarter, sometimes two quarters. So some of the data is a little stale, and I try to find news updates to see if anyone has at least done some preliminary research to tell us what the most recent information is. So again, what you're going to get from me today then is a shortened version with a whole lot of subject matter not covered. But I structured this hoping that there would be a number of new persons who had never been to the Henry George School before, but were attracted to the subject because they wanted to get an update on the state of the economy. So for some of you seasoned, vets, some of this is going to be very familiar to you. It won't be very new, but as always, I would like this to be as interactive as you want it to be. So if you have a comment or question, if you want to challenge one of my assertions based on my interpretation of statistics and data, feel free to do so. We'll have discussion. So I think in two sessions we'll get through this material. But who knows? We'll find out how we proceed. So anyone who has lived very long has gone through economic cycles, and that's one of the important points I'm going to make throughout this presentation, that we are in some part of an economic cycle that research has substantiated, reports on average, repeats on average every 18 to 21 years. We go through these cycles of boom and bust, and we're going to talk a little bit about where we are in the current cycle. And it is a very difficult time to have this discussion because of the politics. So, the politics won't end the cycle, but the politics can accelerate the cycle or delay the cycle somewhat, which is why the average is not 18 years exactly, but over history, based on the research done by a number of economists that we've worked with in the past, is an average of 18 to 21 years. So I've come to understand that the cycle is not caused by forces beyond our control. Rather, the causes are to be found in our laws relating to property rights and to the methods by which government at all levels has chosen to raise revenue needed to pay for public goods and services. And that's really an important observation that mainstream economics and mainstream economists don't fully agree with or recognize. Typically, our political and ideological divisions stand in the way of objective, fact-based pursuit of public policy solutions to our shared problems. And more than ever before, we are a society divided over what to do. And many people think we should do nothing. That if people are unemployed for a long period of time, well, they should depend on philanthropy. It shouldn't be a responsibility of the federal government or maybe any level of government to step in and help them. And there's great debate over public spending over social welfare programs. And then there's great debate over what to do about the environment. So we're dealing with all of these issues, and what we then have to look at is what that's happening in the real world consistent or inconsistent with mainstream economic theory, and is mainstream economic theory in need of correction so that the public policies derived from theory are appropriate. And I will explore these issues as I go forward. Well, here's a picture of former chairman of the Federal Reserve, who seems to be having a serious headache in this photograph. Well, it's no secret that the discipline of economics has been a subject of a lot of criticism for the failure of most economists to provide meaningful insights into the causes of our boom to bust prone economic system. For a lot of reasons, economics has long been referred to as the dismal science, or not a science at all. But fortunately, there have been some professional economists and other economic analysts, such as myself, and some of you are on this session with me tonight, who've devoted ourselves to the application of scientific investigation of economic matters, and none more so than Fred Foldvari. Some of you probably knew Fred. Unfortunately passed away a number of years ago after an unfortunate accident in his home. But he was one of the few economists who researched the existence of this 18-year average cycle going back over a century. Fred's work said, if you go look at the data, this 18 to 21-year cycle has repeated again and again and again for at least the last century. In chapter 12 of his 1990 book, it's titled The Science of Economics, which I have on my School of Cooperative Individualism website if you want to download a copy. He focused on the nature of the business cycle. He relied on this research to predict in 2007 what he wrote would be the Depression of 2008. And here's what he had to say. There are two causes of the business cycle. One is financial and the other is real. The financial cause is the expansion of money and credit by the banking system. This monetary expansion lowers interest rates so that banks can loan out the extra money. Low interest rates induce a greater investment in and purchase of real estate. The real side of the business cycle is this increase in construction and in real estate speculation. He goes on. At the height of the economic boom, real estate prices are high and interest rates are rising. These higher costs choke off further construction and buying, so the rate of growth of the economy falls. The continuing slowdown stops the expansion, and as investment falls, the demand for goods also falls. And the whole economy then falls into a recession and then into a depression. And to end up this quote, he writes, in the United States, there has been a real estate cycle with a typical duration of about 18 years. This cycle was discovered by real estate economist Homer Hoyt, who explained, well, there were variations in timing between different cities and different types of property. The urban real estate cycle was approximately 18 years in length. Hoyt adds, the urban real estate cycle has been closely associated with the general business cycle. And so that's a guide to anyone who really wants to understand what has been going on. And if we think of the trough of the last cycle, the bottom of the last cycle being 2010, 18 years would be 2028. If you want to take it from the actual 2008 crash, then we're looking at next year as the likely point of recession or possibly worse. Well, in addition to a low recognition by many economists of the power of this cycle, another problem is the interpretation of statistics. Economists and most mainstream analysts consistently point to the measurement labeled gross domestic product to indicate the extent to which the economy is growing. The mainstream media reports on an increase in GDP as a positive outcome, basically without any further analysis. But how reliable is GDP? Not very reliable. In reality, relying on it as a measurement of the health of the economy or the well-being of our society is really problematic. GDP includes all spending by government regardless of the source of funding, whether from taxes, borrowing, or monetary expansion by the Fed and by the banking systems. More than this, there is no qualitative judgment regarding what the spending is for. I don't remember who came up with it, but some astute person, maybe it was Keynes, I don't even know, said, well, if you get paid for digging a hole and then you get paid for filling the hole back up, gross domestic product is just increased by the money that was spent to cause you to dig the hole and then fill it back up. But what real economic growth has occurred? Nothing. So there's all sorts of these activities that increase gross domestic product, but really don't benefit mankind, don't benefit a society, and do not really result in real economic growth. Well, a change in the calculation of gross domestic product using the purchasing power of the dollar in 2017 to counter inflation showed a significant drop during COVID-19's pandemic, and then followed by this upward climb, as you can see in the chart. In the fourth quarter of 2024, nominal gross domestic product for the U.S. was 29.7 trillion. And we have to ask, who benefited? Did people really benefit? What was the effect on the median household income, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? All these questions need to be asked without really relying on gross domestic product as anything that should really be looked to confirm the health of the economy. Well, then there's this, the elephant in the room. Government does not raise enough revenue via taxation and other fees to pay for what government spends. The total debt owed by the U.S. government is now about $38 trillion and still climbing. 29 trillion is held by investors and other governments, and about 8 trillion is held on the books of the Federal Reserve. So what does it cost to service this debt? In 2024, it was $882 billion. And for 2025, it's forecasted to go up to $1.2 trillion. Well, okay, where are you going to get the $1.2 trillion? In the United States, there is no real sense that we're going to have significant increases in taxation, although Donald Trump says he wants to tax people who have incomes over, what, $225 million or something. I forget what the number is. But in 2024, the federal government collected just under $5 trillion in revenue. That's a big shortage. Thus, servicing the public debt absorbs one out of every $5 in federal revenue. And that means that unless you increase taxes or find other sources of revenue, programs have to be cut. And it doesn't look like the spending on defense is going to be the programs that are going to experience cuts. Those 180 plus military installations around the world all have to be funded. But if we don't get increases in tax revenue and there's an increase in the rate of on government securities, well, that $1.2 trillion servicing amount may look low. And I'll give you one more bit of information before I stop to see if you have any comments or thoughts. Household debt. Each of you here can think about your own situation and what's happened to it in terms of your household debt yourself. Certainly your cost of living has gone up. If you are living in an apartment, your apartment rent no doubt has gone up. If you're an owner, your property taxes may have gone up. Certainly your utility costs have gone up. And for everyone, our medical expenses have gone up, even if you have adequate or decent medical insurance. So by the third quarter of 2024, and this again is the most recent debt statistics I could get with a chart, we're just under 18 trillion. And about 3.5% of this was in some state of delinquency. So if it's mortgage debt and that's part of the delinquency, that means there's a long list of people who are getting set up for foreclosure, eviction, and the loss of their home. What will happen to them? But as of the first quarter, the total debt has gone up to about 18.3 trillion, just in, from the third quarter of 2024. So the discussion about our infrastructure has been intense. It is, in many sense, aged and crumbling, and it's going to cost a huge amount of money, whether that money is raised by taxation or monetary expansion, whether or not it's raised by taxation at the local and state levels or at the federal level. Those are big issues, particularly since what we know from the Trump administration is that they are against revenue sharing from the federal government to the states. And therefore, the states, if they're going to do something about infrastructure in their own geography, they're going to have to figure out a way to raise the revenue independent of what they might have expected to get from the federal government. However, Trump's plan is to use $200 billion in federal funds to spur at least 1.5 trillion in infrastructure investments, partnering with the state, local, and even the tribal system, as well as the private level. So he's gambling that federal money can be leveraged into a much larger pool of funds. And we'll see what the states do in order to raise that revenue. I live in New Jersey, and the governor's budget just announced, indicates there's a real serious budget hole because of the decline in expected federal revenue that would have been coming. Well, here's my sense of what the Trump model is. To me, what he's doing is beginning with the more conservative view that federalism should return most or a lot of responsibility to the states, and that the federal government as Reagan argued, should not impose unfunded mandates on the states. So if the federal government is going to mandate that the states do certain things, the federal government should fund them. So if the federal government is not funding, the federal government shouldn't mandate. But that doesn't mean that the states don't have the problems of what to do. Um, I mean, anyone who's driven an automobile on our interstate highway system knows that those systems are now really stressed. Um, Americans more and more are in automobiles, and is the question is it because our public transit systems are inadequate or are aging to a point where people don't want to use them? Is the cost of using public transportation too high? And how do you pay for it if it's too high? How do you subsidize it? So all these decisions are going on at the same time as we're going through a dramatic change in philosophy about the relationship between the federal government and the governments in the states. And from the perspective of someone like me, who's a member of the Henry George community, I'm going to do everything I can to convince my governor that he should look to economic rents as a primary way to balance the budget and to begin to think about, how to improve the situation. Well, for those of you who know me, you might know that for 20 years I worked at Fannie Mae, which was a government-sponsored enterprise. And the last 10 years there, I was a business manager and market analyst in the Housing and Community Development Group that was based in Philadelphia. And part of my responsibilities was to follow the residential property markets in the northeastern part of the United States. So looking to see what the trends were, where property prices were increasing at what rate, how that was affecting our housing affordability, and whether or not we could come up with program designs in conjunction with philanthropic sources, in conjunction with local, state, and federal government money, et cetera, to try to increase the availability of affordable housing to low and moderate income people. And it wasn't easy. I mean, I can tell you that the speculators were always one step ahead of us. We would announce a program that we gain site acquisition, raise the money to build 50 units, and before you knew it, the contiguous properties adjacent to wherever we were doing the development, and whatever town or city it was, were gobbled up, and the prices increased. So it's the system that we have for providing for decent, affordable housing for people has a lot of holes in it. And our economic system, because it's dominated by land speculation and dysfunctional in that sense, has meant that property prices have been constantly increasing. There's an anomaly in this that you might, recognize if I just point it out to you. Those of us who have managed to gain ownership of a residential property and remain in that property for some period of time, we have gained a windfall profit in increased land value, no doubt about it. And it's something that for a large percentage of U.S. households is a considerable part of household net worth. And if land prices were to be brought down significantly and remain down significantly because of the changes in tax policy advocated by those of us in the Henry George community, a lot of people would find an immediate loss in their net worth that maybe couldn't be made up elsewhere, particularly if they were retired, because now they're living on Social Security and retirement income, and they're not in the employment market that we would argue would begin to become a a strong employment market and raise wages and salaries and benefits and all that. But if you're retired, that's beyond you. But as I always ask people who talk about, uh, you know, preserving their net worth from their property price, I ask the question, where do your adult children live? And do they own property? Well, if they own a property, it's probably not in the same neighborhood as the parents or anywhere nearby because there's just no affordable housing for them. So they're commuting longer distance to work. They're living more distant from their family, and the societal impact, of course, is a constant increase in sprawl development. And the infrastructure costs of sprawl development are enormous. Um, so that's a big power of land markets. And we have allowed land markets to largely control our overall economic activity. And it's had a detrimental impact on society as a whole, even though many of us have benefited by the dynamics. A better understanding, and I should say, I think I've told some of you this before. Um, I happened on the solution by accident as an undergraduate when I was in college. Um, I happened to go to a public forum on in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The governor was proposing a comprehensive land use plan for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and uh, I had the summer job I had was in state government, and I asked to go to the forum and cover it for my boss and write a report on it. And one of the presenters there was a city planner from central Pennsylvania, and he was talking about this concept of taxing land values and reducing the tax burden on housing and other buildings as a way to stimulate economic development and to curb sprawl. And he mentioned Henry George. So when he was finished with his talk, I went up and I said, I'd like to learn some more about this. And so he said, give me your name and address. I did. And a week or two later, I got this giant package of articles from him. This is 1972. So I looked at them, read them, and tucked them away. And really didn't think about them at all until 1980 when I was managing the residential mortgage program for a commercial bank, and I was assigned to be the community lending officer. And at one meeting, when I was in a neighborhood with a lot of distressed property and people were talking about what to do and they needed subsidies, one of the people there said, "Well, there's this idea by this Philadelphia from the 19th century named Henry George that we could solve these problems by taxing land values." And I said, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And shortly thereafter, I discovered the fact that there was an extension of the Henry George School in Philadelphia. I went down, registered for the program, and changed my life. Um, and I don't know if it's because I'm someone who can think relatively clearly, or it just seemed like common sense to me that we should not encourage land speculation, and we should reward people who take care of their property and are willing to invest in new construction. But we need policies that will bring land to its highest best use, and that's really what the Henry George idea is all about. And at the same time, it will help curb sprawling development. Look at this image that I have on the screen, okay? It identifies a large empty parcel of land within a reasonably short distance of a good deal of development. And why is that land vacant? Well, it could be for any number of reasons, but one reason is certainly that the cost of holding it vacant is insufficient to put financial pressure on the owners to bring it to its highest best use or sell it to someone who will. So when someone owns a big parcel of land like this and the highway next to it is widened, improved, or let's say that was at one time a 2-lane road, and then public funds were brought in and was turned into a 4-lane road, and then a major highway. There will be windfall gains in those contiguous properties all along that highway, particularly closest to the interchanges. And that's just what happens. Understanding that that's what happens, that does lead to the idea that, well, since these increases in land value are unearned, they're windfall gains to the owners who happen to have adjacent contiguous properties. Since the public expenditure on the highway caused the increase, then there's justification to capture that increase to pay for the infrastructure spending. It's a reciprocal relationship. And if the owner of the vacant land doesn't feel that they want to invest in development sufficient to generate the revenue to cover the increase in the payment to the public for the increased value of the land, then sell it to someone who will. That's one part of the argument. So the next slide here helps me explain why I think the economics are straightforward. Every parcel, every tract of land in a community has some potential annual rental value. And this rental value is capitalized by forces of supply and demand. And those forces of supply and demand are influenced by other, externalities like, what the quality of the government is locally, what sort of public amenities are available, all of that. And that is capitalized into a potential selling price. And that's, again, from my experience, just the way markets work. The rental value is therefore directly related to locational advantage. And locational advantage is directly related to the quality of public goods and services available to the location or to its natural advantage. It's on a harbor. The climate is really good. It's just a destination for people on travel, whatever its natural amenities are, influenced and improved upon by the quality of the public goods and services available. So as a community and as the state invest in new infrastructure, owners of land are going to experience unearned windfall gains in land value that, from my perspective, rightfully belong to the community as a whole. Now, does the community have a claim on 100% of those increased values? Well, think about that, because every community still relies on some services provided by some other level of government. So the state does provide services, and those services have a value. The federal government does provide some services, and those services have a value. And this is why Nick Tiedemann at Virginia Polytechnic Institute, and is a knowledgeable Georgist economist, has argued for revenue sharing of economic rents collected locally upward to the state and federal government, and even potentially to the international community. So that's just another thing to think about. So what's this graph I have here? This is just to show you what is distinct about land. The supply curve is straight up and down because the supply of land is fixed by nature. It's inelastic. We can't create any more land. We can, by our labor and investment in capital goods, we can drain a swamp. We can, do some change in what the land looks like and what its potential use is. But on the whole, the total supply of land is fixed by nature, and so therefore is if not 100% purely inelastic, is almost inelastic. Getting back to the analysis I just gave you of what the right public policy ought to be with regard to land, we face our conventional form of real estate taxation. That's what's in place now. And so under the conventional form of real estate taxation, which generally involves land that is vacant being grossly underassessed as a percentage of its full potential selling price, purchasing land as an investment makes good sense. And after subtracting whatever annual property tax payments required, the owner experiences a net imputed income stream that again is capitalized by market forces into a selling price. And the owner might offset those taxes altogether by offering the land under a lease to some potential user. Vacant land is almost never assessed at anything close to its current market value. I was just on a call earlier today with colleagues who are working in Baltimore, trying to get the state legislature in Baltimore to pass legislation that would empower the city of Baltimore to move to a two-rate property tax structure, and thereby reduce the rate imposed on property buildings, the assessed value of property buildings, and increase the rate on the assessed value of land. Assessments are a real problem of vacant land in Baltimore. There are the position taken by assessors is something like this. If it's a commercial piece of property, if it's zone commercial and there's no building on it or no activity and there's no revenue generated, then the tax on the value of the land that they look at is not what someone would pay for it to develop it, but what the owner can afford based solely on the fact that there's no revenue stream. And so parcel after parcel in Baltimore is assessed at a couple $1,000s or less, when its potential selling price based on other sales could be as high as $100,000, or who knows. But administration of assessment and assessment practices really contributes to the problem of land speculation being such a profitable way to treat land and hold it off the market as for a long period of time. So this leads me to another, and again, I tried to design this talk mostly for the uninformed, mostly for individuals who had never, taken a course from the Henry George School or even come to listen to these lectures. So that's why you're getting a heavy dose of why land value taxation is, in my view, a best practice public policy. If communities want to stimulate investment in job creation, if they want to stimulate construction of new buildings and renovation of existing structures, all that is needed is to begin reducing the taxation of these physical assets. Reward people for investing in development, and then gradually capture a higher and higher percentage of the land's rental value. And the publications that I'm showing here are providing case studies and evidence that this idea works. And it works in many different types of communities. It works in rural communities. It works in urban cities. It could work with regard to agricultural communities where farmers are no longer burdened by having to pay a tax on the annual value of their farm equipment, their farm buildings, and they simply have to contribute the rental value of the land that they control. Now, if you think this is a very heavy liberal idea, that it's only embraced by those on the left or progressives, Here's what Milton Friedman had to say about it some years ago. And if you don't know who Milton Friedman was, I mean, he is he's from the Chicago School. He wrote the book Free to Choose and did a whole television series on free market activity. And yet he says there's a sense in which all taxes are antagonistic to free enterprise. And yet we need taxes. In my opinion, the least bad tax is the property tax on the unimproved value of land. Governments can collect taxes best on things that don't move. Land is an ideal basis of taxation because you can't take it away. And he made these statements during a debate of the American Education League in the 1970s. I forget, I don't have the exact year. Oh, 1978. And I would say that Friedman's lesson is easy to understand. Just look at this photograph. You have, two pretty well improved properties, and in the middle of it, you have a vacant lot. I would guess that the land under those buildings is assessed at some multiple of the assessment on that vacant parcel. That would be the experience of the real world. If the assessment was brought up to its full market value, that might induce development. It would further induce development if all of these owners were exempted from paying any property tax whatsoever on the value of the buildings that they own. And so again, the ideal is coming up with law and tax policy that will stimulate real economic activity, that's job creating, and that reduces to the extent possible the amount of underutilized and vacant property within a high density environment. And again, then simultaneously reduce the initiative to begin sprawling development, which requires huge amounts of public infrastructure spending to support and and is environmentally degrading in the process. So land value taxation, if properly implemented, has many, many positive side effects. All right. So let's take a look at the big thing, the big subject that's going on right now, Trump's tariffs. The monetary value of goods and services imported by U.S. businesses and consumers is significantly greater than the value of goods and services U.S. businesses export. What are the reasons for this? Well, there's a lower cost of production in some countries. There are government subsidies paid. Not that the U.S. doesn't have subsidies to its producers. The quality of what is produced outside of the United States may not be easily matched domestically for various reasons. There might be lower costs of raw materials. All of these are factors. And there's also another factor that's not mentioned very often, and that is about 45% of global production occurs by multinational corporations. And multinational corporations have the ability to move production based on many considerations, like where the cost of doing business are lower, where labor costs might be lower, where environmental restrictions might be lower. Generally speaking, this makes common sense. If I'm a corporate officer looking for the bottom line, I will move my costs to where taxes are highest, and I will move my revenue to where taxes are lowest, just to take advantage of what laws are in place in different parts of the world. So we have what many call a trade deficit. Milton Friedman, looking at this, said what some economists are saying. You're telling me it's a bad thing that I get all these goods from foreign producers and I give them paper currency or digital currency in my sovereign money, and they have to do something with it. They have to they exchange it for some other country's sovereign currency if they're importing more goods from that country, or deposit it in the international financial community, invest in various kinds of bonds, government securities, or try to purchase hard assets in the country of the uh, currency that you're holding. But basically, is a trade deficit really such a bad idea in an environment of flowing rates on currencies, exchange rates on currencies? That's what Friedman's arguing, that the monetary system will take care of it by floating exchange rates. Well, we remember what happened the last time we had a serious trade war. It didn't go well for anyone. The Hawley-Smoot tariff probably triggered the movement from recession to depression, sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. Keynes in 1932 offered his advice on how to rescue the global economy and to avoid an even more serious financial collapse. And here's what he said in 32. Each nation, in an effort to improve its relative position, takes measures injurious to the absolute prosperity of its neighbors. And since its example is not confined to itself, it suffers more from similar action by its neighbors than it gains by such action itself. Competitive wage reductions, competitive tariffs, competitive liquidation of foreign assets, competitive currency deflations, competitive economy campaigns are all of this beggar my neighbor description. And he adds this: the modern capitalist is a fair weather sailor. As soon as a storm rises, he abandons the duties of navigation and even sinks the boats which might carry him to safety by his haste to push his neighbor off and himself in. Well, okay, Keynes sounds wise, but if you read Keynes, he did not ever come to the same sort of conclusions about the power of land markets and the private appropriation of rent that Henry George did. He made a statement about doing away with the rentier, but in his writings, he never comes up with a practical solution to the gains from land speculation or to the concentrated ownership of land and natural resources. Um, you know, perhaps he died too soon, and maybe he would have come to a better conclusion. I don't know. But I don't think he would be surprised by what analysts at JP Morgan Research expressed on March the 7th. They said that there is a 40% risk of global recession occurring this year because of the administration's shift in the application of tariff policy. And certainly JP Morgan's people don't have any ideological in desire to say anything about the economy. They're looking out for their investors, their shareholders. So exactly what the full effect of whatever final tariffs are set will impact U.S. producers and consumers, well, that's a subject of a lot of discussion among economists and even our business journalists, and to a limited extent by our legislators. As I understand it, the new tariffs did not apply to goods that were already in shipment from the exporting country. So those goods are by now at in at port. Although a lot coming from Asia coming into California, the latest I heard about California is that um, there have been so many layoffs in California at the federal level that a lot of the goods are starting to back up again. I don't know what the current situation is today, but that was something that was reported on NPR uh, that I heard on the radio yesterday. So companies were already raising prices. Walmart has announced that it has no choice but to raise prices on many of its imported goods, and so we'll see how that's going to affect the economy. It's certainly going to materially affect those who are, let's say, at less than 100% of area median household income, who are already strapped by other expenses, and 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 those who have been dependent on social welfare benefits. If they're losing their benefits, they're in serious financial difficulty. And again, it's what should be done about it. Well, let's hope that the states and each individual state is going to decide, to what extent it's going to try to raise the revenue to deal with this problem in their state, to some extent based on who controls the governorship and the legislature, if it's Republicans versus Democrats. Um, all that is going to play out over the next, months and the rest of 2025 for sure. Well, here's a chart to look at to see, one problem that has already existed with regard to U.S. exports. Um, Exports to China, to Mexico, to Canada, they've represented a half of food exports by the United States. And so if the Chinese uh, look for other sources of food rather than the United States, that can't do anything but hurt U.S. farmers more than they're already hurt. So we have a trade deficit in food now, believe it or not. We're importing more and more food ourselves. Uh, this next chart looks at the share of the food dollar that has been spent on beef, on meat products. So we don't really think that, from what I've read, no one is predicting that the tariffs will cause greater revenue for farmers. Total farm output actually tripled between 1948 and 2021, but has not been increasing since then. And this chart on beef is a good example in the changes in the retail to farm gate price spreads and the farm share of the retail food dollar over time. So more and more of the price you're paying for food is not for the food itself going back to the farmer, but for the supply chain steps downstream from the farm. And this is where a very few huge firms control processing and distribution. And so they basically control a lot of what goes back to the farmer. And if the farmer is in a tight situation and borrowing costs go up, that is something that we ought to be worrying about as well. Take a look at this. This is the average tax change as a share of income in 2026. So you can see, how different segments of our society have had increases in their taxation and whether or not they can afford it. So last November, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy came out with a forecast that said that if just a 20% tariff was imposed on imported goods from all trading partners except China, the poorest fifth of Americans who have incomes of $29,000 or less would have a tax increase in 2026 equal to 5.7% of their income. And that's assuming that those in that group still have $29,000 of income. Is the problem too few competitors? Even before the start of this evolving trade war, we could point to climate change. Whether it's human caused or not, there have been many changes in our climate that are causing producers to restructure their supply chains and consider expanding operations in the United States because of the long distance that is required for their goods to come across the oceans to get to the United States. And if there are more hurricanes, if there are more violent storms, those are interruptions that people are already anticipating they're going to have to make some changes for. So that may cause an increase in domestic production. Will it cause an increase in prices or not? To be determined. An issue to be addressed is whether some firms in the tech environment, such as Google, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, Apple, have become too dominant in their respective sectors, and should they be broken up? I don't have an opinion about that one way or another. You may have an opinion. You think that our antitrust legislation is strong enough, too strong, not strong enough. Well, what about Walmart? Is Walmart a monopoly? They control 72% of warehouse clubs and super centers around the country. In 40% of metropolitan areas, Walmart sells more than half of all groceries. Is that a monopoly? Should Walmart be broken up? And how about Amazon? Well, Amazon dominates e-commerce in general. It sells 74% of all ebooks and 64% of all print books that are sold online. Just two firms, Dean Foods and Dairy Farmers of America, control 80 to 90% of the milk supply chain in many states. There are a lot more details on all of this available on the website of the Open Markets Institute. And so you might want to check that out there. Let me go back here. And for tonight, I'm going to end here so we can have some discussion. In January, a World Economic Forum report identifies countries that are rapidly investing in manufacturing. That includes Singapore, Brazil, India, Bangladesh, and Mexico. In response to the continuing reduction in the number of manufacturing firms in the U.S., the Biden administration signed the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 to encourage investment in clean energy. But that was one of the first things that Trump changed. On his first day in office, he signed an executive order announcing plans to revoke the executive order on implementation of the energy and infrastructure provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act, and what have been the results so far. Interesting. Not what I expected when I looked at the numbers. A number of companies have announced significant new investments in the U.S. Johnson & Johnson, Abbott Laboratories, Apple, Chobani, Crazy Art. Honda Motor is moving production of its Civic Hybrid hatchback to the U.S. Hyundai announced plans to expand its U.S. automobile production. NVIDIA is to begin manufacturing chips and AI supercomputers in the U.S. The Swiss pharmaceutical company Roche will be expanding its U.S. operations. TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor maker, announced a huge investment in U.S. manufacturing capabilities. So maybe Trump's strategy is having some positive impact.